Good evening and welcome to the 2021 Ole Miss Choral Symposium. I'm Don Trott, Director of Choral Activities here at the University of Mississippi. Tonight we continue our 5-part series titled Performing Renaissance Music, a Virtual Symposium on Historical Performance. Tonight's presentation is Part 4, Phrasing and Text Underlay. On behalf of the University of Mississippi, I welcome you, and now it's my pleasure to welcome again Dr. Dennis Shrock.
Thank you, Dr. Trott, very much. For this 4th video addressing performance practices of the Renaissance era, we turn to the categories of phrasing and text underlay. Phrasing dealing with undulations of text emphasis based upon natural declamation, and text underlay dealing with the natural alignment of syllables and words with musical notes. But first, as has been my procedure in all previous videos, I'll begin by showing examples of the visual arts in my effort to relate them to the oral art of music, with the Renaissance artists here demonstrating their commitment to and amazing skill at representing things and people in a natural manner. Visual naturalness being related to the oral naturalness of phrasing and text underlay. Here are 2 of the many drawings Leonardo da Vinci did in his attempt to understand the anatomy of the human body and thus represent the natural body in his paintings. From a very young age and throughout his life, he filled more than 240 pages with sketches of skulls, hearts, hands, feet, shoulders, and spines, all with notes about the sketches written in his iconic backwards left-to-right script. And here are 2 self-portraits that show the Renaissance endeavor to represent the face in natural expressions. On the left is a self-portrait of Jan van Eyck, the early Renaissance painter employed by Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy, who had one of the largest and most famous musical courts in Europe. Note the natural expression of Van Eyck in this painting, as well as the natural folds of cloth on his headpiece. The painting on the right is a self-portrait of Albrecht Dürer, the German artist who knew Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael and was famous for his woodcuts, some of which I've shown in previous videos. In the painting here, note his hair, mustache, and beard, as well as the folds of cloth on his headpiece. And painters in the Renaissance began attempting to capture the mood of the person being painted. Such is the case with Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine, seen on the left here. The lady has a look that conveys something about what she may be thinking or feeling. And in Raphael's famous painting of Pope Julius II, here on the right, one cannot help but be captivated by the look of the Pope's face and wonder about what he may be thinking or feeling. In sculpture, here are 2 panels of the Cantoria designed by Luca della Robbia for the sacristy of the Duomo, the cathedral in Florence. The Cantoria was a large balcony to hold singers and instrumentalists, and della Robbia in his Cantoria has panels in basso relief, or bas-relief sculpture, that show various musical scenes. The ones here are of choristers, and I show them to emphasize that the depictions are only recognizable and the figures only stand out from the background by varying degrees of dimension, by figures in relief from each other. The same depiction of dimension is seen in this drawing by Andrea Palladio, undoubtedly the most famous architect of the Renaissance era, known for his country villas, many of which are in the city of Vicenza, just a short distance west of Venice. In the drawing of the villa here, you see details of the structure that are clearly recognizable because of the dimensional nature of the drawing. One recognizes arches and windows because the lines represent relief. And such is the case with music, in that one can only recognize and hear musical phrases. One can only tell one phrase from another in an imitative texture by a varying of the phrases as they come in and out of the texture, as they are in relief from each other. And in these Palladio drawings, one is clearly aware of the Renaissance artist's capability in representing perspective in art. On the top is a drawing of the Palazzo Chiaricati, designed and built in the city of Vicenza, the drawing looking very much like an architectural three-dimensional model of the villa. And on the bottom is a drawing of a backdrop for one of the scenes in a stage performance at the Teatro Olimpico, also designed by Palladio for the city of Vicenza. The backdrop is obviously one-dimensional, although it conveys considerable depth. As the visual artists attempt to depict the dimensions of the natural world, the musical artists were committed to the same in music. And the stunning feats of natural depictions in painting, sculpture, and architecture should resemble equally stunning feats of performance in music, with phrasing being highly nuanced and with a wide range of emphases and volume levels that emulated phrasing in speech. The correlation of spoken and musical phrasing was recounted by a number of Renaissance-era authors, most notably the Italian musical theorist and composer Nicola Vicentino, in his treatise of 1555, in English translation, Ancient Music Adapted to Modern Practice. He wrote, "One should sing music alla mente, to emulate the emphases and effects of an oration. For what effect would the orator make if he recited a fine speech without arranging his pronunciations with fast and slow movement, softly and loudly? That would not move his hearers." Michael Pretorius writes similarly in the second volume of his 1619 Syntagma Musicum. Quote, "The importance of forming and shaping musical lines is known by all those who train singers. Almost everyone is aware of the displeasure of hearing an orator talk on and on in the same flat tone rather than pronouncing with a rising or falling inflection as required by the text and of the affections. If this is annoying to hear in speaking, it is even more the case with singing." End quote. The analogy given by Vicentino and Pretorius is not difficult to comprehend or appreciate. One can easily grasp the concept of singing the text of a composition as the text would be spoken, with natural declamation. However, it is extremely difficult for modern-day singers to actually do this, since today's singers and instrumentalists are so focused on the durational value of notes and rhythms. We see music as conveyed by the term come scritto, which translates as written. When we see, for instance, 4 quarter notes, all looking the same, we perform them all the same, with the same degree of emphasis and volume. We only vary emphasis and volume when we see expressive signs. Moreover, our fixation on notes and not texts is supported and furthered by our practice of learning pitches and rhythms first, often through solfege or count singing, which are wonderful tools that build musical literacy and ensemble cohesion. But solfege and count singing ensure that text will not receive its due duration and attention. By the time the notes and rhythms are learned and text is applied, static phrasing is set like cement. This manner of approach must change in order for Renaissance phrasing to be manifested as it should. We must look at and learn text before notes and rhythms, and we must be ready to face challenges that impede the transfer of speaking to singing. First, we must achieve a level of competence in speaking the language of a composition. That is, we must be able to speak the text as if we were conversing, delivering the text free from the rhythms of its musical notation. And this includes being able to pronounce foreign languages and being aware of the text's translation. Knowing a word-for-word literal translation of the text is critical as one later aligns the text with its musical setting. For example, here is the text of the first part of Palestrina's famous motet, Sicut Cervus. We can first read and become familiar with scansion of the text in English. As the heart yearns for springs of water, so longs my soul for you, God. And then we can compare the scansion to the Latin. Sicut cervus desiderat ad fontes aquarum, ita desiderat anima mea ad te Deus. I'll do that again. As the heart yearns for springs of water, sicut cervus desiderat ad fontes aquarum, so longs my soul for you, God. Ita desiderat anima mea ad te Deus. And after becoming comfortable with this, we can applique the text to its musical setting, recognizing that there are several points of emphasis in the phrases. Here is the opening phrase of the motet with caret signs represented by the letter V, indicating these points of emphasis, or as I like to call them, points of arrival. As in, we travel along in a phrase and reach certain points of arrival or emphasis. Note that there are two small caret signs for the emphases on cervus and fontes, and a larger caret sign on aquarum. The differences in sizes of the signs representing the differences in the points of emphasis. Cervus and fontes are not as strong as aquarum. When one takes this approach of beginning with the text and then applying it to the music, one can see how brilliantly Palestrina crafts the melodic line to match the declamation of the text. The shape of the first portion of the phrase, sicut cervus, the shape of the second portion of the phrase at a higher pitch level, desiderat ad fontes, and the final portion of the phrase with greater melodic intensity, aquarum. The melodic shape matches the textual shape. Another example of this is seen in Hans Leo Hassler's motet Dixit Maria. First, the text. Mary said to the angel, "Behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it done to me according to your word." Dixit Maria ad angelum, ecce ancilla Domini, fiat mihi secundum tuum. Again, Mary said to the angel, Dixit Maria ad angelum, behold the handmaid of the Lord, ecce ancilla Domini, be it done to me according to your word, fiat mihi secundum tuum. And then its application to the music, shaped very much like the opening of Palestrina's Sicut Cervus. But here, it is important not only to move toward a point of arrival, but to make sure that unaccented syllables are appropriately unaccented, as I've shown with decrescendos under Maria and Angelum. For a third example, we can look at Palestrina's motet Veni Sponsa Christi, become familiar with the text and its translation, and determine the natural undulations of emphasis. And when we compare this to the music, we see that the word Christi is set to a lengthy melisma, and that the point of the emphasis is at the end of the melisma, specifically at the final strong tactus of the melisma, which here is on the downbeat of measure 6. Melismas such as these are, of course, frequent in music of the Renaissance and are clearly a departure from normal declamation of text. They are, in essence, decorations of the word that heighten its meaning. In performance, we merely lengthen the shape of the phrases in which the melismas occur. We also see, again typical, that the phrases repeat in an imitative fashion, with the points of emphasis varied throughout the texture. The points coming in and out of the texture as shapes come in and out of paintings, sculptures, and drawings. The melodic lines are like the bas-relief sculptures of Della Robbia. Moreover, when we look at the overall design of the text in relationship to the music, we see that Palestrina has divided the text into 4 phrases. Veni sponsa Christi, measures 1 to 21. Accipe coronam, measures 20 to 38. Quam tibi Dominus, measures 38 to 52. And Preparavit in Aeternum, measures 50 to the end of the motet. And these 4 phrases are structured so that the first 2 and the final 2 overlap, which you can see in measures 20 to 22 at the top of page 2, and measures 50 to 52 at the bottom of page 3 and top of page 4. Phrases 2 and 3, on the other hand, have a clear separation in measure 38. Thus, the motet is divided into 2 parts. So the phrases not only have an internal shape based on natural declamation, they also have a structural design. And finally, note that some of the text is in italics. This is because these passages of music had no text underlay in the original manuscript, but merely repeat signs, meaning that the text of the former phrase of music was to be repeated. The use of italics is an indication of this practice in modern-day scholarly editions. Here is a performance of the motet by our symposium singers. Note not only the ebbs and flows, the emphases and de-emphases of text, but also the syncopations that heighten the expression of the text. We also have to deal with longer texts, such as that in Jacob Arcadel's madrigal Il Bianco e Dolce Cigno. And we must determine how the phrases of the text are shaped and divided into sections. And in addition, we have to consider the expression of the text and how that is best conveyed through tempo variation. First, the English, and then the Italian. The white and gentle swan dies singing, and I, weeping, reach the end of my life. Il bianco e dolce cigno cantando more, et io piangendo giungo al fin del viver mio. What strange and diverse fate that he dies unconsoled, and I die blessed. Strano e diversa sorte, che more sconsolato, et io moro beato. Death, which in dying fills me full of joy and desire, if in dying I feel no other pain, with 1,000 deaths a day I would be content. Morte, che nel morire mi empie di gioia tutto e desire, se nel morir altro dolor non sento, di 1000 mortil di sarei contento. Here is the opening soprano line with markings for emphasis and de-emphasis. The line very much constructed, like the opening of Palestrina's Sicut Cervus and Hassler's Dixit Maria, with melodic contour matching that of the natural declamation of text, Il bianco e dolce cigno cantando more. And here is the ending of the madrigal with similar markings that take into account short or partial phrases of text as differentiated from longer and more complete phrases. Di 1000 mortil di. Di 1000 mortil di sarei contento. Di 1000 mortil di. Di 1000 mortil di sarei contento. Di 1000 mortil di sarei contento. Here is what this sounds like as sung by our symposium singers.
Piangendo, giungo al fin del viver mio, et io piangendo, giungo al fin del viver mio. Strano e diversa sorte, sconsolato, ed io moro beato. Morte che nel morire mi empie di gioia tutto e di desire, se nel morir altro dolor non sento. Dile morte, dile morte, dile morte,
I present now a final example of text phrasing, Vittoria's motet O Sacrum Convivium, which I've chosen for a number of reasons, including its original scoring for SSAA, its structure in two parts, its repetition of phrases, and its need for tempo variation in order to capture the text's expression. Let's take a moment to become familiar with the text and its division in two parts. O sacred banquet in which Christ is received, recalled is the memory of his passion. O sacrum convivium, in quo Christus sumitur, recollitur memoria passionis eius. The mind is filled with grace, and the pledge of future glory is given to us. Mens impletor gratia, et future gloriae nobis pignus datur. Alleluia. Here is a performance by the Symposium women, with phrasing based on natural declamation, varied intensities reflecting repeats of phrases, and tempo variation highlighting the expression of the text. In addition, reflecting performance practices discussed in previous videos, we are performing the motet in a key with many sharps, thus giving us a pleasurable and stable ethos. Furthermore, the score represents text underlay with some of the phrases in italics. Becoming relatively proficient in pronouncing foreign languages becomes more challenging when dealing with Italian. As set to music during the Renaissance, many Italian words were written and scored as contractions and combined with other words or syllables on a single note. In these instances, one needs to know whether a syllable has antecedent linguistic function and should precede the note under which it is aligned as a sort of pickup, or whether the syllable should be accented and take time, maybe a lot of time. Monteverdi's madrigal Si ch'io vorrei morire is an example. Here, you can see that I had to notate the distribution of syllables, which I did with little notes just above the text. Measures 8 and 9 need special attention because the note lengths require varied distribution. In measure 8, the alto is different from the other parts. And in measure 9, there are 3 ways the syllables need to be distributed. Then there's the manner in which the word ai should be pronounced and also expressed, given the dramatic nature of the poetry, which you can see here. This text was set by Monteverdi sometime before 1603, the year that it was published in his 4th book of madrigals, and it represents the final stage of text setting during the Renaissance, a stage characterized by exuberant and unrestrained expressiveness that takes the lead in all aspects of phrasing. Here is a rendering of the madrigal projecting this expressiveness by our symposium singers.
I
In summary, if we shape phrases according to the natural declamation of text, with varying points of emphasis and de-emphasis, with momentum and tension reflecting repetitions of phrases, and with tempo varied according to the expression or character of the text, the music can be heard as the paintings, sculptures, and drawings are seen, all full of great designs and shapes. The process of getting to know this is, of course, challenging and time-consuming, and not welcomed by many conductors, especially those who have not had extensive training in or experience speaking foreign language. This includes me. I am not a polyglot, and foreign languages have been problematic all my life. When I was in graduate school, one of my professors, Julius Herford, spent countless hours preparing me to sing the evangelist part in the Heinrich St. John Passion. I'll never forget, Jesus ging mit seinen Jüngern über den Bach Kidron. Da war ein Garten, darein ging Jesus und seine Jünger. Just as I'll never forget the Boy Scout oath. And when I was a young faculty member at Westminster Choir College, I spent countless hours with one of the voice faculty, Lois Laverty, who patiently worked with me. Texts are challenging, as is pronunciation, and I would be remiss if I didn't address this topic. You'll have noted that I pronounce Latin according to European practices, and this is what I think is appropriate. Thus, veni sponsa Christi, accipe coronam, quam tibi Dominus praeparavit in aeternum. This is, of course, an opinion, not a factual circumstance based on primary sources. However, it seems to me that the sound of a language, just like the ethos of a key, can either hinder or help the expression of a composition. The book Singing Early Music, The Pronunciation of European Languages in the Late Middle Ages and Renaissance, edited by Timothy J. McGee, with A.G. Rigg and David N. Klausner, and published by Indiana University Press, is a great help to conductors as well as to singers. Text underlay, or the alignment of text with music, is yet another feature of performance that is critical to a satisfying performance of music, but also challenging in that text placement in Renaissance sources was unclear and haphazard. Text was often incomplete, with many phrases not scribed in full and others written in regular print, and with syllables of words joined together, even though these syllables were to be spaced out and sung to multiple notes. With such uncertainty, it is difficult to know what word or syllable should be attached to which note. In dealing with such circumstances, modern-day editors almost always treat text placement according to modern-day principles. Words and syllables are aligned to the notes under which they appear in original sources. Groups of words are repeated so as to minimize lengthy melismas, and phrases are repeated without any written indication to do so. Most problematic, editors subscribed to the currently popular come scritto, as written, principle of musical performance by transcribing the original text exactly as it appears on the page. Each word and syllable is placed under the note that is directly above it. In doing so, the editors ignore or disregard many of the 15th and 16th century directives about text placement, and they also fail to consider natural declamation in phrasing. Editors view the text with present-day eyes and understandings of notation, instead of with the eyes and understandings of a Renaissance musician. To set the stage for an example, here is the tenor part of the Kyrie in Josquin's Missa Pange Lingua. You can see the illuminated large letter K for Kyrie, the tenor clef, the circle mensuration sign indicating tempus perfectum prolazio minor, equivalent to 3/2, and the notes and rhythms of the music. And underneath, you see the remainder of the word Kyrie, followed by pange lingua, and nothing more until eleison on the second line. Here is what this looks like transferred to modern notation. The word Kyrie is not placed under notes. Pange lingua seems only to be a reference, not something to be sung. And eleison is not divided into syllables under notes. The performer is left to determine how the text should be sung according to standard guidelines of the time. And Heinrich Fink says exactly this in his Pratica Musica treatise of 1526. Quote, "In polyphony, the syllables of text are often not placed near the note heads to which they belong. Consequently, the singers must be responsible for textual alignment." End quote. In doing so, the singers of the Renaissance followed basic rules. First, final syllables of text were placed on final notes of music. Second, important words and syllables were placed in important musical locations, sung to long notes or on melismas. Third, text phrases were repeated when musical phrases were repeated. And fourth, all notes in ligatures were sung to one syllable. But disregarding these guidelines, here is what we see in a present-day authoritative edition of the Josquin Mass. Yeah, and here's how awkward and nonsensical it sounds.
Kyrie eleison. Kyrie eleison. Eleison.
Instead, here is what it should look like and sound.
Kyrie eleison.
Text underlay makes a difference in how we actually like or dislike a composition. With improper underlay, we simply don't like the music and are loath to perform it. But with proper underlay, the situation is reversed. So when we see an edition with text that is awkward and off-putting, we should simply adjust it. When we see this edition by a reputable publisher of Verdelow's madrigal Italia Mia, with the final syllable of the text taking 2 notes in the soprano part, taking 4 notes in the tenor part, and taking 6 notes in the first bass part, we can simply move the final syllable to the final note of music. And we can adjust other awkward places as well, many of which I show and discuss in the book Performing Renaissance Music. But I'd like to point out here that since the aspect of si placet, as you please, was so prevalent during the era, with instruments playing a texted part instead of it being sung, we can take a non-texted part and add text to it, which is what I've done in Dufay's ballad La Belle Cécile. I took the words douleur, grande douleur, soupier et mène grande douleur, sorrow, great sorrow, wept and sighed in great sorrow, and I applied them to the untexted part, since these words seem to be the essence of the story the poetry was expressing. That story being a dialogue between a maiden and her father. The fair maiden sat at the base of the tower, where she wept and sighed in great sorrow. Her father asked, "Daughter, what is wrong? Do you want a husband, or do you want a lord?" "I don't want a husband. I don't want a lord," she replied. "I want my lover who rots in the tower." "By God, fair daughter, you cannot have him, because he will be hanged tomorrow at dawn." "Father, if he is hanged, whisk me beneath. Thus people will say, 'These were loyal lovers.'" Here is the music sung by our symposium singers, with the texted part, phrasing based on natural declamation, and tempo based on the expressiveness of the text. Putting all the aspects of phrasing together, I leave you with Jacques Deprez' motet Ave Maria Virgo Serena. The text is in 7 verses with a closing personal prayer, and each verse is composed in a different imitative style. Verse 1, the most pure and literal, has pervasive imitation at the octave. Verse 2 has homophonic duet imitation with some faux bourdon parallel motion and melodic sequences. Verse 3 has imitative duet imitation, and pervasive imitation at the interval of a fifth. Verse 4 has homophonic duet imitation again, but this time in dialogue fashion. Verse 5 seems to be homophonic, but has a somewhat hidden canon between soprano and tenor. And verse 6 has complex imitative polyphony that pervades all voice parts. The prayer at the conclusion of the motet is completely homophonic. Here is a recording of the motet by the Santa Fe Desert Chorale demonstrating our attempts to match phrasing with the imitative styles. In conclusion, phrasing in performance should be natural in that it should reflect qualities of natural speech, the emphases and de-emphases of words and syllables, the ebbs and flows of tempo, and the rising and falling of volume. The placement of text under music should also be natural, and when both phrasing and text underlay are natural, the music becomes accessible. It becomes something we want to engage, and it also easily resembles the natural qualities of the visual arts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shrock. Tomorrow evening, we conclude our 5-part series with Part 5, Ornamentation and Expression. Until then, thank you for watching.